spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, don't probably watch this review yet.
To a new update because of bugs and things that might be there that cause my other programs. Your iPad as another monitor. It allows you to have a dual monitor setup.
So I just came back from seeing the Joker, and I thought I would share what I thought of it, broken up roughly into two areas, and some of them aren't exactly consistent, but I thought, well, okay, one, maybe I would address it on the craft side, right? The aesthetic and whatnot. And then on the performance / message side. So in terms of, the craft of the movie, I mean, it looks really good. There's no doubt. There's definitely a look that the film has. There's no doubt about that the film has a look. It's very, very well photographed. At least I thought so. I thought it was really, really well photographed, really well lit. So whatever the message that, whatever the message you could say Phillips or whoever, the filmmakers are trying to get across, they definitely put a lot of thought into the craft of the movie. I will say that I felt at times it drug a little bit, and I felt particularly the ending, there was a couple times, I'd say, like just in the last 20 minutes, which you might say is nitpicking, but I felt like in the last 20 minutes of the film, I kept thinking, okay, it's going to end now, and then it kind of just did another little segment. You can't say anything about, Joaquin Phoenix is definitely a great actor. I think he did a superb job of trying to inhabit the role of the character. I will say that I don't think I like this Joker as much, though. And overall, I just think DC gets it wrong. I was reading this article that was critical of Martin Scorsese, or no, rather it was an article in which Martin Scorsese was critical of the Marvel movies, and he was saying that they were not works of cinema and that they were more like theme parks. Okay, sure, maybe. But I don't know, that just sounds kind of like snobbery to me. Just because everybody's not making period pieces about gangsters, then somehow they're not really doing cinema. I find that to be kind of a load of crap. So again, it looked really good, decently well acted. I will say that I felt like maybe the movie just relied too much on Joaquin Phoenix, too much on the performance of one character, that there really weren't any, there was a few other, to use a D&D reference, there was a few other non-player characters, right? But there was just like him. And given, given that the character descends into this madness and has mental health issues and kind of just goes crazy, that gets to be, it's in the beginning it's interesting, but like over, like 2 hours or 2+ hours, right, of just mental health degradation, is really hard to watch, especially if it's not propped up by any other significant characters also in the movie. So I felt like that was maybe a negative too. especially given that you had people like Robert De Niro who agreed to sign on to the film, who is a great actor, right? That they didn't use more of him in the movie. I know that they kind of wanted to not maybe have like a nemesis, because, okay, it wasn't Batman versus the Joker, but I felt like, well, that kind of detracted from it.
I'm going to set this down.
So that's how I felt that, you know, it would have benefited from having, you know, some other characters and some other actors in it to help just give it some more body and some more weight. You know, it definitely is a very dark movie. I feel that one reason why I like, you know, whether they're great works of cinema or not, one reason why I like the Marvel movies is just that they're entertaining. They may not be art house films, but they are definitely entertaining. Not all of them, because some of them are bad. But the ones that are good, I feel like are good comic book movies, right? And maybe this is where I'll transition from the cinema craft aspect to the, you know, to the performance message part. You know, at the root of everything, these are characters that were created really as comic books for kids. That, not to say that, you know, I mean, obviously Christopher Nolan, I love the Dark Knight trilogy. Those are also serious films as well. But I feel like, I don't know. I still feel like there was some lightness to them. And of course, there was a great cast of really strong characters. I mean, Michael Caine and Alfred, Morgan Freeman and Lucius Fox. Of course, there was a villain, so there was somebody for him to pit himself again in each of those three movies. And I felt like all we're getting is just a 2 hour or 2+ hour kind of window into a person losing their mind. That isn't, personally, I don't find it that really engaging after a while. It's like, okay, fine, they're nuts. The disturbing part comes then, well, what is the message the filmmaker's trying to give? Because they seem at some point like, you know, they're giving so much of a window into the breakdown of this person, who then goes and commits acts of violence against people that are some of them warranted and some unwarranted, you know. So in the scene on the train where he gets beat up by those guys, that might be warranted for him to, at least for the first two guys, right? I mean, the guy ran away, all right, but you can say, okay, he lost his mind in the heat of the moment, right? But for his coworker that comes to his apartment, that's definitely unwarranted. And therefore, the way it's portrayed, it's like, well, are you glorifying this? And I had seen where, you know, apparently there was a scare. I hadn't watched much about the build up to the film, but apparently some people were worried that there might be a shooting, you know, or an incident at a screening of the film. And then now after seeing the film, I kind of understand some of those sympathies where, you know, I mean, I don't I don't mind violence in movies, but violence to what point, right? It just seemed like it wasn't clear whose side. Not only was the director or the writer or the screenwriter on, it almost leaned towards like, this, because at the end of the film, I guess things like break down into chaos, and he's lauded by the mob, not the mafia, but like this mob scene of anarchy, people going crazy, and he's like having his moment in the spotlight. It's unclear whether or not, I suppose you could say, well, you can be left to come to those conclusions on your own, that that's a bad thing. However, the overall mood that I get personally from the film is that it's a good thing, and I think that's kind of messed up. I mean, yes, when Bob Kane wrote, or at least when he created the character Batman, it was a darker character. I don't know if it was meant to be this dark, but it just seems the overall tenor of the DC films is just depressing, right? And there's a difference between dark and depressing. I would say, if anything, that's where Christopher Nolan kind of got it right. I mean, I was listening to an interview of him, and he was saying that he wanted to basically, create a very realistic world we would all recognize, that's sort of like a normal reality with an extraordinary character in it. So Batman or Bruce Wayne is an extraordinary person in an ordinary world, and Joker is an extraordinary person in an ordinary world. I don't feel like I don't think that there's anything extraordinary about the Joker. There's just tragedy, but to be quite honest, lots of people live with incredible tragedy, far greater tragedy than certainly what the character experiences in the film, and yet don't become mass murderers. So I think there is some definite legitimate criticism against the message coming from the filmmakers. They may want to try to say, well, we're not trying to have a message, you take from it what you will, but you made the film, so there has to be some kind of message. It's not a documentary, right? And it's not just simply voyeurism. There is something there that's being conveyed. So, as I said, I found the first half of the film interesting. I found the second half of the film lacking, and I kept thinking about the time and I wonder how much longer this is going to go, which is never a good feeling one to have. I was a little surprised, given the positive reviews that the film had and how everybody was excited about it and so on and so on. So, see it for yourself. It's dark. It has a few violent scenes. As an adult, you probably can handle it. This is absolutely not a film for children. I think one person had said, this is and I kind of agree with this too. This is one of the legit criticisms against filmmakers that want to take a thing that is it is a kid's thing, right? I mean, I certainly grew up watching in syndication Adam West with the campy, Batman on TV, and of course I grew up reading a lot of Batman. My oldest brother even drew Batman for DC. So I grew up certainly, from a child to an adult, having a great appreciation for comics, and I think whether they want to or not, whether they put an R rating on it or not, some kids are going to want to see this movie because it's about a comic book character, right? And even though they seem to want to basically all but move away from the character in all but name, right, and just the makeup, there were a few oddball references, right, where of course you see you meet who you presume to be Alfred for a moment, this guy with a British accent. Of course, Thomas Wayne's son introduces himself as Bruce, who I guess we're supposed to think he may become Batman someday. They briefly reenact the Joe Chill scene where Bruce's parents get murdered in an alleyway. And if you were basically going to just say, you know what, we're just going to take this character in name and caricature only and throw out all the rest of the history, then why, as these kind of afterthoughts, throw in these homages to the origin of the character, but in the end of the day, it's also supposed to be nothing about that character. So I felt like that was also a legitimate inconsistency. But, it looked good, and you may enjoy it. So if you got an extra $20 checking around, I didn't see it on IMAX. I didn't want to wait. There was a 12 o'clock show on the RPX, which is a sort of like regular a regular plus one theater. Like it's a little bit nicer than just the regular. I know it was on IMAX, but I didn't feel like waiting around, and it was like, I don't know, 20 some odd, almost, it was expensive, and I didn't feel like shelling out the extra bucks. Given that it wasn't like a big action movie or something, I'm like, well, I don't need to see this on IMAX. Check it out, leave some comments, let me know what you think.